Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. Today I'm excited because this month in March we're trying to hit on something that's kind of near and dear to me in education, which is STEAM education and different ways that we can kind of bring that cross curricular in. And we've got a fabulous guest with us today, Toni Evans, who is a national board certified teacher, recently left the classroom and is doing a lot of work in this area. So if STEAM or STEM or STREAM or whatever you're calling it in your area is newer to you, or you're a coach who's supporting that and wanting to kind of get into that a little bit more, this is the episode for you today. So welcome, Toni.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cory.
Yeah. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself before we kind of hop into our topic for today?
Yes, I taught chemistry, physics, and some biology in the classroom for over 30 years. And I did teach a variety of different classes. And I really did enjoy doing things like project-based learning, a lot of cross-curricular things with other teachers, working in some of the programs like SECO, which is the Science Education Council of Ohio, and the National Science Teachers Association, learning new things. And even after leaving the classroom, I've taken a couple courses just to keep on top of this information because it is really important to us in education today.
Right. Well, and I love that you say that because we're all about constantly learning here on the Coach Replay Show. It's definitely the only way to be able to continue to, refine our craft and be true masters in instructional leadership and teaching and whatever role we have in education, for sure. So that's awesome. So yeah, we are definitely going to be talking about that project-based learning kind of approach within STEAM. So let's kind of go ahead and get started. So why, as I mentioned, STEM and STEAM now, and some people are even going into STREAM. But we've really started making the shift from STEM education to STEAM education. And so why is this an important move for us in education?
Well, I think it's kind of a natural move because when you think about it, you're actually looking at design. If you're going into engineering, that is an important component because if you're having a product, you want it to be appealing as well, even if you're looking at architecture. So not only do you want the product in the end to look good, you're also now bringing in some of the people from the artistic end of your classroom. So you're appealing now to the artistic end of students in the other part of the brain. So you're looking at it from the industry standpoint and from the educational standpoint. So bringing that piece in was just a natural kind of thing to do.
Yeah, and it's so important. First of all, I'm a big fan of the shift to STEAM because art is my kind of background and my other love outside of education in life. But it also, as you mentioned, like as we get into the workforce, the real world today, it's not enough, and it never really has been enough to just have a great idea, have a great even invention, but you also have to know how to pitch that and market that, right? And so bringing in some of those elements for that piece so you can kind of sell the idea, get it out in front of people so it can make the impact that has the potential to make is really, really important.
Yes, because I think bringing every student into the classroom and getting all of the students involved makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think even some of us as educators, we may not have the background in art, but we do have that art teacher that we can bring in and have their concepts and their ideas brought in. So we can always bring them in to add that little extra help. And that also then allows teachers to work together. And that always will broaden the student's experience.
Yeah, and again, like that in our real world, right? That's the collaborative piece that they'll have. Like they're not necessarily going to have, the particular forte in all of those areas, but they can collaborate with others in that and see their connection to it, right? Like as you said, like how can I, as a student interested in art, also be connected to some of these more academic, subject areas like math and science and even technology, right? So I think that's really, really powerful.
And I think when students see, especially with project-based learning, they see the teachers collaborating together, the math, the science, the engineering, the social, they see the teachers collaborating, and then they begin to see, oh, working as groups is a natural thing. Instead of teachers now working all around in their own individual classrooms, they're now seeing their teachers get together, and they're seeing the idea of collaboration being something that is natural and done in the real world.
Yeah, they're getting that modeled there for them. Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing, with collaboration comes, the building of relationships. And that's a big part of, STEAM education and a project-based learning as well. So as we're talking about kind of getting started in STEAM education, when it comes to developing these kind of high quality relationships, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What types of relationships, how do you form them? What's even the purpose in STEAM education?
You start with relationships. In the beginning of developing a project, the teachers need to kind of get together. And as a high school teacher, it's a little different, especially with the school I was in. We were on block scheduling, so we couldn't actually have the teachers teaching the same things at the same time. So I would get the other teachers' input, and then I would have them be the panel that would judge the project in the end. So in the beginning, for the teacher, it's getting together with the other teachers, figuring out what you're going to do with that project. Mm-hmm. And then for the students, in the groups that they're in, they're really assigned a role that they're responsible for. Like there's going to be somebody that is like the leader of the group, somebody that gets the material, somebody that designs a project. So each student gets a role so that in the end, you don't have one person doing everything in the project. So it's not like some of those projects that you've seen before where it's like one person does everything and somebody just kind of rides on the coattails. So everybody does have, it's more of a puzzle piece approach. And then there's also building the relationships with the community, because then you want to bring in some people from the industry who can maybe explain things in the project. Maybe if it's a robotics project, you're going to bring somebody from the company that does robotics. Or if it's something that's an environmental project, bring somebody that is part of, the EPA or something like that. So you're building community relationships as well.
Yeah. And I'm hearing, outside experts, right? And even, authentic audiences, can I work with those outside experts in the process of developing my product in our project, and then also being able to kind of show that to them, right? Not just the teachers in the building, but also those community members. But, I really see for our instructional leaders who are viewing this, like this is where I really can see some of their role starting to be able to kind of make a big impact, right? Making sure that we're supporting the collaboration amongst our teachers, even if we don't have that planned time. Sometimes as an instructional coach, I've been the instructional coach supporting an entire campus of teachers. So I know like what is happening in Ms. Johnson's classroom and Mr. Mackley's classroom. And I can kind of see the big picture of that cross-curricular piece. And then I can, prompt that whichever teacher who's kind of getting ready for this project-based learning kind of experience to say, oh, you should get with Ms. Johnson. I think that's going to be a great, avenue into what she's already got planned for next semester, kind of being able to be that support for that. Sometimes it's just difficult for us as teachers to know how to have those conversations, or we're afraid to commit. We're afraid to say yes because we're already overwhelmed with things. So having someone who can say, hey, like, let's just have a quick conversation. Then I've got the heavy side of this, I can kind of run with it once I have an idea. I think it's powerful.
And I think sometimes you don't really know what other people are doing. Like, for example, there's a gentleman who maybe was a football coach, but was also an adjunct professor of physics for non-majors. And it's like, I was doing a projectile project, and it's like, what an awesome person to talk about projectiles. There was another guy that worked for he was a National Guard, and they had to drop stuff out of helicopters. And it's like, there's a great example of projectiles. So when they were building their catapults and trebuchets, those were outstanding people to bring in that actually had used that information in order to be accurate in their work. So
yeah,
knowing people is very important.
Yeah. And that's the part where, I've been doing a lot of work here recently in kind of experiential learning, which, STEAM definitely has those ties to, especially project-based learning as kind of a structure to create and foster that experience for those students. And it's about the authenticity, the student kind of driven part of those things. And then, being able to bring in those outside experts who can say like, yeah, this is a real, like, this could be a real job, or this is a, real, this is how all those things tie together. Because again, as you mentioned, we compartmentalize all of these subject areas through school for so many years. It's kind of hard for students to start to see the bigger picture. They may see like, I'm great 7th period when I'm in math class, but I'm not so great, 2nd period in ELA. So, maybe that's just not anything for me, but there could be some really great ties for that. So, but I love that idea of just getting to know your colleagues and some of their backgrounds, right? Like, what are the things they do outside of being an educator, or before they were an educator? What do they have experience in that can also be, leaned on throughout that project? So that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about project-based learning. So for the folks who maybe they've heard that term, but they really are like, how's that different from my typical group work that I do? Or that, we do a project and, sometimes one student does all the work for the group, those kinds of stigmas. So what is project-based learning, and what grade levels is it really best suited for?
Well, project-based learning really is, they're developing something. In the end, it's pretty much like, for an example, I did a project where they were to build a catapult, and the catapult actually had to do something, like it had to go over a 3-foot wall, and so they actually had to get together. And what it did was it brought together, is like they had to study the history of catapults, where it was used in history. There's also, looking at the designs of catapults in history. And so the concept is to, at the end, have the product. And then that product, not only is it put maybe in a PowerPoint in their demonstration, but they also then want to share that out. And it's nice to share it out with the panel. And I have a panel of teachers, and those experts will come in and, even invite the parents if they like. They kind of actually have to get up there and pretty much perform their information just like they would in a real world setting. So the concept of project-based learning is not only providing some kind of project at the end, but actually demonstrating it as well to show that it actually works. And then again, parts of it also are the fact that each kid has a role, so that one person's not doing it all. And one of the things I always kind of tell people is, you will look at the groups and make sure your groups are a little bit more heterogeneous, so that you can actually, some kids, you're going to have some that are maybe learning disabled or such, and you can assign them roles that are effective for their particular abilities. And then some kids you might want to see them shaken out of their roles. Maybe you want to see a kid who's a little shy, maybe making them the design engineer this time. So it really is a setting where you can actually get kids involved. And one other thing about project-based learning is it tends to be a little more long-term, because you are putting all those individual pieces in. And so it's going to take a little longer. It's not like a 2 or 3 day thing. It'll take a little bit longer. So you have to be able to build that into your curriculum a little bit better. So I don't know that there are some classes that are designed completely on project-based learning, but for me, I would just take about 2 or 3 per 9 weeks, or we were on semesters, so I would do about maybe a little more than that. But actually, you can use project-based learning for any grade level. You just want to tailor make it for them. And when I did project-based learning too, I tried to use like something called the 5E model. And that was the one where you start off with you engage the students. So especially with the younger kids, that's kind of more of the model a lot of people will use with the project-based learning, where they start off with the engagement and then go off to the exploration and the explain part, and then the elaborate, where they're building the project, and then evaluate. So I tend to see that some of the younger grade levels, they use that a little more. But I did one many years ago for it was the vocational school, and they use the 5E model with their project-based learning. But I think for the younger kids, they tend to do that and do it more in stations, where they'll work on each piece at different times, where they're focusing on it. So it's like, okay, everybody today is going to work on the social studies piece. So I think they guide it a little more when they're working with the younger kids.
Yeah, and it's important, when I used to do a lot of consulting and training around differentiated instruction, which we're going to talk a little bit about differentiation in a little while, and just how we group our students, heterogeneous and homogeneous, same skill or different ability. but then also taking in consideration for their age level, like developmentally, what
Mhm.
can be expected, right? So, that type of information is also really helpful and can also guide you to specific types of structures as you're thinking about the design. But I can definitely see, as you mentioned, like project-based learning is something that takes a little bit more time. And with that time, you're able to weave in all of these cross-curricular elements, which is why it's a great model to use when we are working on, STEAM projects and
Mhm.
the such, right? So
Mhm.
now I often will hear with project-based learning, oh, we tried that in our district, but it was something that only happened in May. But you mentioned doing doing that more frequently through the year. And of course, yes, there are schools that are just completely based on
Mhm.
that day in and day out. So what I'm curious, I know this wasn't part of the what we had planned on talking about today, but how do we start to make that shift? How do we start to make there's space for it in a more frequent basis throughout the year, as opposed to waiting till after state testing sometimes is kind of what's seen as the good window for it.
Mhm.
Any tips or advice for our audiences wanting to see more project-based learning more frequently in their schools?
I think you evaluate your curriculum. What I would do is, like, I taught a lot of chemistry and physics. So where it was very heavy math, especially with chemistry, when we were doing like quantitative chemistry, that
Hmm.
was a great place for it because I'm really going to get that math science, connection. So I can really easily get the history and technology part in there very easily. Physics, same thing, where we were doing like equations and stuff for kinematics, really easy, like the trebuchet thing. So where you see a really good connection between the math and science with the technology, that's a really good
Hmm.
place to do it. Because when they, especially even with testing,
Hmm.
wherever you see a connection between math and science, that's the easiest way to do it, because you can always pull in history, you can always find reading assignments, you
Right.
know so I think that's probably where you see the strongest math and science connections, is the best way to start pulling them together.
It's a great way to kind of look at it and think about it through your curriculum.
Mhm.
I love that. So we're talking about project-based learning. Not every student has, the same role in this. So it's not like
Mhm.
it really is kind of this, you mentioned kind of a puzzle or almost like a jigsaw kind of
Mhm.
approach to a project. So then let's talk briefly about assessing student understanding, especially as we are supporting teachers and thinking through how will they do this. So, what about individuals? What about groups? How do you motivate students to not maybe let someone else do all the work for them, but really kind of rise up to their particular role within that group?
Um, there are just, you have to individually check students. So
Mhm.
there are different checkpoints that I would have, that I would go through, and I would check students for understanding. Like I would do like the question on the board, bell ringers to do check for understanding, especially where you're looking at, because you do have to check for math concept understanding to make sure everybody understands, even if you're the person doing like the parts where they're doing the equations and graphing and stuff. You
Right.
still have to make sure everybody understands that. So there are places where you do need to put a quiz in there somewhere to check for individual student understanding. Um, so I do actually have a unit test that goes along with their stuff when they do it, just to make sure everybody understands every piece. But there's also a place where I have individually, before they actually share out to the whole, project group, they
Mhm.
have to share to each other each piece. So when I ask them questions before they share out, I might ask the person that's maybe the design engineer why they chose certain materials. And so I'll ask them what
Mm.
the other roles did. So they have to be prepared to answer those questions as well. So that's another way to check to see if they understand what's going on in all
Mhm.
positions. So
Yeah,
I
to be
think,
able to kind of assess the engagement, right, within that
mhm,
collaborative workspace.
mhm,
I love that. So, and I think also like that this is another place where we can kind of go back to the importance of having those high quality relationships and being able to kind of ask like, all right, so this is something that they'll need to be able to do. What, even if that's not maybe not my area, what would be a good thing for me to do? When would it be a good checkpoint to kind of be able to kind of check and support them along the way. So just kind of thinking through some of those elements too.
Right. And remember, we just went through the whole pandemic. And so there were times where students would be absent. So it was very important that the students would leave all of their information for the other students, or even be able to check in virtually while they were absent. So, there is another piece that's very important, that they understand that their role is so important that they must also be responsible to leave behind their notes in the group folder. And if they're not there, it is assumed that they didn't do it. So, I mean, that's another checkpoint that they're responsible for, that material is left behind for everybody to use.
Right. Kind of that teaching them that reliability piece and responsibility within that. So this is very, student driven, right? We've kind of, in project-based learning, we've kind of determined a couple of things. We've structured it. So we've got those checkpoints within there. We've thought, strategically about our groupings and our roles within that. But again, like what the students end up really kind of producing throughout this, that's where that choice and voice and a little bit of authenticity can really start to kind of shine, I think. So as we wrap up, how do the students really know that they've accomplished the task? I mean, sometimes projects can kind of end with, you haven't really found a complete proof of concept, but you've got something to kind of share to contribute, right, to the progress of, catapults in that field. So how would they know?
Well, if you want to use the example of catapults, so let's say they end up making a catapult and it does not actually go the 3 feet barrier or something like that. So at that point, then it's like, what did you do wrong? Can we sit down together? And that's a great place where a teacher can come in and intervene. What do you ask them? What went wrong? What could we do differently? If we look at this mathematical equation, did you maybe not do your calculations right? What exactly went wrong and what could you do to fix it? And, if there's time, we could fix it, or at least be able to figure out what is going wrong and where they went wrong. And I do see that could be a little different with younger students. You might have to be a little more careful on how you guide those questions, because, they might not quite understand all of those differences. So you might have to treat it a little differently with younger kids. But, sitting down and actually analyzing it and what went wrong, what could you do differently, just like a scientist or engineer would do. So that is one of the whole goals of doing the project-based learning, is actually, authentically looking at things, because in the real world, things go wrong. I mean, that is definitely something that would happen.
Yeah. And being able to learn from those mistakes. And it's important that, again, like our students experience that, like they experience a little bit of failure and productive struggle, right? So we're still there alongside them, but we also don't discount the effort, right? And things that went through that. It reminds me of my son's got a wonderful science teacher in 6th grade this year who does these, kind of mini experiences, little mini labs. Some of them can even be considered like a mini project-based learning cycle, because they're looking through several different elements. She's bringing in all those pieces, but at the end, they've got to accomplish a task, right? So they recently did an Apollo 13 study, and so she said, your spacecraft's got to make it from this file cabinet to this file cabinet, and if it makes it this far, it's this many points, and these questions will be kind of your postmortem questions, and if it makes it this far, it's this many points. But no matter how far those spacecrafts made it down the line, they still got points for it, right? Like it wasn't your spacecraft failed, therefore you failed. This lab, there was that follow-up piece, which I think is also really important within the project-based learning, that we've got strong rubrics, and as we think about assessing our students, and that they could also use to self-assess. Are we there yet? Do we have some time to kind of iterate some more? But then we also have considered the conversation, right? The group or individual student conferencing that can happen afterwards. And we talk about, like, why was that such a success? What did you learn from that? Where was that aha for you? And, or why did that not quite work out the same way that you had hypothesized it would? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I always give the students the rubric ahead, and making sure that if you have younger kids, making sure the rubric is something they can understand. So when you do say, okay, so you only got 4 of the 5 points in this section, it's easy for them to say, oh yeah, I guess we didn't quite do that next part.
Right.
So
Right.
they can also kind of check it off. And if they don't quite have enough time, they can understand, okay, I am going to take, 4 out of 5 points on that section. And I'm going to get 20 out of 20 on this section because we did this really well. And so they can almost know what they're going to score before the end, and kind of, they do self-judge themselves. And a lot of times their score is exactly what I would come up with and the judges would come up with.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I love self-assessment in classrooms. So, yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And again, like, it also helps them lead to, am I done? Or should I keep working with some of the time that I have?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned exceptional learners a little bit earlier, as we talked about, some grouping of students and some different ways to think about that. So let's talk about that role of differentiation for our students who are exceptional, right? So whether that is they have an identified disability that impacts their learning or communication and collaboration in the classroom, or maybe they are an exceptional learner on the other side. They're gifted and talented and need to be exceptionally challenged. What are some ways that differentiation can kind of be woven into these projects? I think you mentioned one, which is considering the role, right? Either to their strengths, or even taking them out a little bit of some of their comfort zone. But what else?
I did mention too that I do like little assessments. So mathematically speaking, if I have students, the math part seems to be hard for a lot of them. So if they're struggling in math, I'll kind of take a group of them aside and kind of do a little mini math lesson to get them caught up. And that usually works out pretty well, because, then they just kind of pop back in their group where they're needed. So that's one way. And then I can send them, and it's awesome now because you can go to so many websites and just say, hey, here's a link so you can go practice this math skill. And then when they come back, they re-quiz and make sure that they've got that concept before we actually have the big test. So that's a great way to check on those math skills. And even if it's a science concept skill or whatever area they're struggling in. So that's one way to hit the lower end. Now, the kids that are exceptional learners, they will ask a question. They're like, what if I did this? And that's where those kinds of things can go. I'm like, well, try it. Chemistry was a tough way to do that, because I'm like, please don't ever do anything until you ask me, because I don't want you mixing chemicals together. This
blow up things, create some noxious gases. Yes.
So I'm like, please always ask first. But I love those what if I did this question.
Right.
So those are, but I said, if you're going to do that, don't just put things together. I want you to predict what's going to happen. I want you to try and write that equation first, and then, predict what's going to happen. So those are great ways for those kinds of, extensions to occur.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like, I kind of thinking through that, and even though this is project-based and there's a lot of front loading or project-based learning, and kind of really thinking about those designs and when will I be checking in with students, and what that rubric looks like, and collaborating with the other teachers, being active in, during that student-driven time is, again, kind of really important. So you can constantly keep that pulse on, where do I need to adjust? Where do I need to scaffold? Maybe some of this is social skills for somebody who's, been given a task to strengthen some kind of executive functioning around kind of on-task behavior or time management, and they're struggling a little bit with managing their team, giving them some pointers within that. So you have in our notes and takeaways for today's episode, which again, folks can access at learn.sibme.com, or if you've signed up to be on our email list to receive these episodes and those takeaways straight in your inbox, you've definitely got those there. But I love these key questions that you have here as folks think about how they're going to prepare their class for STEAM projects. And we've also got your information for folks to be able to follow you at LinkedIn. But I'd love for us to wrap up a little bit with, as you think about when you were in the classroom facilitating STEAM projects and project-based learning, what, as an instructional leader, would you have really appreciated, or what did you appreciate if you had that kind of support from somebody who's an instructional coach or some other type of instructional leader on your campus or in your district. What really can we do as instructional leaders to help teachers who are maybe just getting started in this, or maybe stuck in a rut, right? They're only that May PBL person, and we kind of want to add some more frequency into that.
I think really the idea of getting many more teachers on board, or at least kind of assessing the skills of teachers to say, hey, what kind of things could you help us do in the classroom? Like, I think there's so much of a disconnect between teachers. Maybe instructional coaches, I think it would be great if they actually started doing more team building between teachers. It's like, instead of having all the English teachers go off together and all the science teachers go off together, actually have more things done in groups that are not so much alike, so that we're learning more about each other as teachers in general. I think starting to separate us out a little bit and shake things up a little bit would be much better, because I think we do so much of that. And yes, we do need that time, but maybe shake it up a little bit once in a while.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great recommendation, and I think that's easy for somebody who's maybe a campus-based coach supporting multiple subject areas, right? Kind of that cross-curricular coach. But even if they're not, right? Even if I've got like math and science coach and ELA and social studies coach, those two coaches could get together. They've got a little bit more time and flexibility in their schedule to get together and talk about what their groups of teachers are doing, and then maximize the use of team time or staff days to start to shake it up. I love that. That's a great idea. Well, wonderful, Toni. I know that in your new role outside of the classroom, you're definitely an asset to those that you support. And I want to encourage our audience to reach out, comment on our episode today, or reach out to Toni on LinkedIn. If you've got questions, be sure to download the notes and takeaways. Anything else, Toni, for our folks before we wrap up today?
Just enjoy teaching and take the first step.
That's right. That's right. And it's March, right? So spring break's almost here. Got a little break for us. And yeah, definitely rest and rejuvenate and just take it one step at a time. I love that. That's great advice. All right, folks. Well, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an episode, whether you listen to us on your favorite podcast platform or you watch our web shows every week. We're super thankful to have you with us. We'll be asking for information soon. We're already beginning to plan season 4. Every season, it gets better and better on the Coach Replay Show. So we'll be asking you what you need to hear, what you want to hear next season. That'll be coming out shortly. And hopefully it's more things like some of these, STEAM education and some of these ideas that we know are becoming initiatives across all of our schools across the country. So thanks again, Toni, so much for bringing in your expertise around STEAM and project-based learning.
Thank you, Cory.
All right. Y'all, see you all next week. Bye, everyone.